Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The mansion's great hall buzzed with a mixture of worldly conversation and hushed laughter. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant light that reflected off the gilt and Persian rugs. The guests, dressed in impeccable suits and shimmering evening gowns, exchanged mischievous glances as they noticed the young woman who had just entered. Amelia Johnson, a 24-year-old black pianist, walked with natural grace, yet she was clearly aware of the hostility surrounding her. Her black dress, sober but elegant, emphasized her dignified bearing. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her gaze, calm but piercing, analyzed every detail of the room, the arrogant guests, the defiant looks, the barely concealed murmurs. No sooner had Amelia approached the gleaming grand piano than Richard Whitman, heir to an influential family, exchanged a satisfied smile with Evelyn Carter, a music critic known for his contempt for talent outside his own circle. They had prepared a subtle staging, to have Amelia perform in front of high society, hoping to ridicule her, to reduce her talent to a mere spectacle. "Play for us, Miss Johnson," Richard said, his tone deceptively friendly, but his eyes glittered with arrogance. The implication was clear: this was a trial, a test of his legitimacy to be among them. Amelia sat down at the piano. She took a deep breath, feeling the tension weighing on her shoulders. Every whisper from the room, every condescending smile, seemed to want to intimidate her. But she knew her worth. Every note she played would be a silent response to their arrogance. When his fingers touched the keys, the first note sounded like a declaration, soft, precise, yet full of power. The murmurs stopped instantly. The guests, accustomed to judging and humiliating, were caught in their own curiosity. Little did they know that this performance, which they had intended to be humiliating, would soon turn into a resounding triumph. The opening bars revealed a subtle blend of jazz and classical, complex and unexpected harmonies that captivated everyone who listened. The entire room held its breath. Every chord, every crescendo seemed to silently remind them of their arrogance and their mistake. Underestimating Amelia Johnson was their greatest mistake. And in that glittering light, in the heart of their pretentious mansion, the young black pianist, with calm and majesty, began to transform humiliation into a spectacle of power and genius. That night, no one would ever forget her name. Amelia Johnson sat at her small wooden desk, surrounded by scattered sheet music and a still steaming cup of coffee. Her fingers played absently on the rim of the miniature piano beside her, as if trying to calm her mind. She had just received a sealed letter, in elegant, neat handwriting. "Mademoiselle Johnson. You are cordially invited to perform at the Whitman Annual Gala, to be held at their mansion next Saturday. Your presence would be an honor for our guests. Sincerely, Richard Whitman." Amelia frowned slightly. The Whitman family was renowned for its wealth and influence. The young pianist knew that such invitations were often tinged with worldliness and arrogance. Yet, a part of her sensed that this was a unique opportunity to showcase her talent to an important audience. So she accepted, unaware that some members of this social circle had already prepared a trap to humiliate her. On the evening of the gala, Amelia arrived at the manor, an imposing building with white columns and manicured gardens. She was greeted by uniformed footmen and shown into a sumptuous reception room adorned with crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs. The atmosphere exuded luxury, but also arrogance. As soon as she entered, she felt the stares on her, some full of curiosity, others clearly malicious. Among them stood Richard Whitman, arrogant and self-confident air, and Evelyn Carter, a music critic feared for his harsh gaze and ability to belittle any talent that didn't meet his standards. They moved closer, exchanging a knowing smile. "Oh, she's much younger than I thought," Evelyn whispered coldly. "Perfect for our little test," Richard replied with a sarcastic smile. Amelia watched them silently, aware of their game. She needed no provocation to remain confident. Her talent was her true weapon, and tonight, she was going to demonstrate it. As she was led to the grand piano, Amelia mentally prepared herself. Every note she played would not only be music, but a silent message: she would not be humiliated. This gala, which was supposed to be an arena for ridicule, would become her first great victory against arrogance and contempt. Amelia walked down the mansion's long hallway, her heels clicking softly on the glossy parquet floor. The walls were covered with antique portraits and sumptuous tapestries, silent witnesses to generations of Whitmans. Each step brought her closer to the piano and the dreaded moment. As soon as she entered the main room, a murmur ran through the guests. Conversations stopped, and all eyes turned toward her. Amelia felt the tension in the air, palpable, almost electric. Falsely amiable smiles appeared on the faces of the guests, but behind each smile hid judgment, an anticipation of her eventual humiliation. She walked forward calmly, her bearing haughty, her shoulders straight, and her eyes fixed on the grand piano that sat in the center of the room. The black and white keys gleamed in the chandeliers, like a silent challenge to anyone who would underestimate her. Richard Whitman stepped forward slightly, feigning friendliness. "Miss Johnson, thank you for coming. We would be honored to hear you play." His voice oozed condescension. Evelyn Carter, at his side, crossed her arms and gave a sarcastic smile, as if to say, "Show us what you can do, or fail miserably." Amelia took a deep breath and sat down on the piano stool. She placed her hands delicately on the keys, and an almost religious silence filled the room. The guests, at first impatient to see her make a mistake, found themselves hanging on her every move. She let out a first chord, clean and precise. The note echoed through the room, clear as a bell, and immediately broke the atmosphere of mockery. The guests, surprised, exchanged uncertain glances. Amelia felt their arrogance waver, but she remained focused, every gesture controlled, every movement calculated. As she began to play the first piece, a subtle and complex melody, the mocking smiles gradually disappeared. The guests could no longer look away. The murmurs of defiance turned into whispers of hesitant admiration. Even Richard and Evelyn began to feel that the humiliation they had anticipated was slipping away. Amelia, aware of the effect she was making, continued to play with grace and confidence. Every note, every chord was a silent response to those who had tried to put her down. The entire room was beginning to understand, she wasn't just a pianist, she was a prodigy, and tonight, no one was going to humiliate her. As Amelia continued her progress on the piano, the murmurs of the guests resumed, but this time tinged with uncertainty. Some whispered among themselves, "She's pretty good, isn't she? But how can she produce something so complex with such ease?" Behind these phrases still lurked a hint of condescension. Many still had difficulty accepting that a young black woman could dominate an instrument they considered noble and reserved for the elite. Richard Whitman, frowning, moved slightly away to speak to Evelyn Carter, his words drowned out by the music. "I don't like it, she makes us look like amateurs." Evelyn nodded, her eyes narrowed. "It's more than a talent. It's a demonstration." Amelia, aware of the murmurs and skeptical glances, let nothing show. Every note she played was measured, every movement of her fingers precise, as if she were weaving an invisible spell that captured the entire attention of the room. Little by little, the tension in the room shifted. The guests, who had come to witness a possible humiliation, found themselves mesmerized by the young pianist's mastery. The sniggers died down, replaced by silent admiration. The eyes that had sought to judge her began to shine with astonishment and respect. Even Richard and Evelyn couldn't hide their surprise. Richard felt a wave of shame pass through him, while Evelyn realized that her reputation as a relentless critic might soon be eclipsed by this unexpected prodigy. Amelia, however, continued to play, knowing that music was her best response. She didn't need words to let the room know they had underestimated a quiet but powerful force. Every note she played was a subtle reminder that arrogance and malice could never eclipse true talent. As the first play drew to a close, a respectful silence reigned. Even those who had predicted her downfall couldn't help but look at her with admiration. The malicious whispers had turned into a silent recognition. Amelia Johnson wasn't here to be humiliated. She was here to shine. Amelia took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the faces of the guests one last time. The silence in the room was almost palpable, each breath seeming to hold in place. She placed her hands on the keyboard, her fingers brushing over the keys with an almost ceremonial delicacy. Then she pressed the first key of a piece she had composed herself, a subtle blend of classical and jazz, intended to captivate as much as it moved. The first chord resonated through the room, clear and vibrant, filling the space with a quiet power. The murmurs that had resumed a few moments earlier immediately died away. The guests, surprised, exchanged incredulous glances. No one had expected the piano, in the hands of this young woman, to produce such depth, such mastery. Richard Whitman felt an unpleasant shiver run down his spine. He had wanted to humiliate Amelia, but the first chord had already changed that. Evelyn Carter, for her part, frowned and forced herself to keep a neutral expression, but her eyes betrayed astonishment and growing admiration. Amelia continued, each note carefully chosen, each chord carrying emotion. The melody rose, sometimes soft and nostalgic, sometimes powerful and dramatic, as if telling a story that only those who knew how to listen could understand. She played with relentless precision, but also with a rare sensitivity, capable of touching everyone's heart. The audience, initially there to be amused by his supposed clumsiness, found themselves captivated by the musical magic. The guests who had anticipated sniggers or sarcastic comments found themselves frozen, their hands sometimes clenched, their breath held. The humiliation they had hoped for was already backfiring, they were now witnessing a miracle, and their own arrogance. Amelia felt the magnitude of the moment. Every astonished look, every held breath, every respectful silence was a silent victory. She didn't need to respond to the whispers, the condescending smiles, or the contemptuous stares. Her music spoke for her. And with every note, she subtly reminded everyone that underestimating a talented black woman wasn't just an error in judgment, it was one no one would forget. Amelia stepped into the heart of her centerpiece. The melody now rose with increasing intensity, moving from soft, melancholic passages to powerful, bold chords. Each note seemed to tell a story of courage, perseverance, and dignity in the face of scorn. The guests, who had initially come to mock her, were now hanging on every move of her fingers. The mocking murmurs had completely disappeared, replaced by astonished stares and held breaths. Some of the women in the room tried to smile politely, but their eyes betrayed genuine astonishment. The men who had bet on her failure bowed their heads, unable to look away from the obvious. Amelia dominated the stage. Richard Whitman, usually self-assured, rose slightly from his chair, tense. His jaw was tense, and his fingers played nervously on the rim of his glass. He felt bitter frustration rising within him, the humiliation he had hoped for was backfiring on him. Evelyn Carter, the critic known for her merciless severity, stood silently, her eyes fixed on the keyboard. Even she was beginning to perceive the magnitude of Amelia's genius. Amelia, aware of all the stares, did not allow herself to be distracted. Her breathing was steady, her back straight, her fingers dancing over the keys with perfect precision. The nuances of her playing, the calculated silences, the subtle crescendos, all captivated the audience. She didn't play just to be admired, she played to show that dignity and talent could never be diminished by the arrogance of others. Halfway through, a shudder ran through the room. The melody was now at its peak, a perfect fusion of technique and emotion. The guests who had tried to prepare their amusement felt their arrogance melt away. The entire room, from the smallest heiress to the most powerful guests, was captivated. Amelia knew this was a decisive moment. Every note she played solidified her silent victory. Music was not only an instrument of beauty, but a subtle weapon, capable of transforming contempt into admiration. As the final measure approached, she slowed slightly, allowing a dramatic silence to fill the room. The contrast between the calm and the power of her performance left everyone speechless. What had begun as a simple performance intended to humiliate a young black pianist had become a dazzling display of talent and mastery. As the melody reached its climax, Richard Whitman felt his patience wearing thin. He had expected Amelia's humiliation to bring laughter and social spectacle, but what he saw now sent him into a dull rage. Enough, he snapped, his voice betraying his irritation, and took a step toward the piano, as if to interrupt the performance. But Amelia, without looking up, subtly accentuated the intensity of her playing. Her fingers darted across the keys with a precision and passion that made the entire room vibrate. Each note seemed to silently respond to Richard's arrogance: "You can't control me, you can't diminish me." Evelyn Carter, sitting nearby, exchanged a glance with Richard. Even she, the relentless critic, felt the ground give way beneath her certainties. She realized that the young pianist wasn't just playing music, she was orchestrating a subtle and relentless revenge. The guests, witnessing this silent duel, held their breath. The tension was palpable, but instead of feeling hostility, many began to admire Amelia's courage and mastery. Every note was a reminder that they had underestimated a young black woman full of talent and dignity. Richard took another step toward her, but Amelia didn't flinch. Instead, she amplified her crescendo, her hands flying over the keyboard with an energy that seemed almost supernatural. The powerful chords echoed through the room, transforming her anger into a respectful silence. Even Evelyn, who had foreseen the pianist's downfall, felt a thrill of admiration wash over her. At that precise moment, it was clear to everyone, the humiliation had failed. Richard and Evelyn's plan had backfired, and the entire room knew it. Amelia, with her poise and grace, had transformed a humiliating situation into a dazzling display of power and skill. As the final chord of his main piece rang out, a heavy silence fell before thunderous applause erupted. The guests rose, some with tears in their eyes, others in silent but intense admiration. Richard and Evelyn, their faces red with shame, finally understood the magnitude of their mistake. Amelia stood up without a word and bowed slightly. Her gaze, calm and assured, swept around the room. Everyone present understood that this was not just a performance, it was a triumph over arrogance, over prejudice, over misplaced pride. The last chord faded into the air, leaving a heavy but vibrant silence. The entire room seemed suspended, as if time itself were holding its breath. Then, a murmur turned into a timid splutter of applause, which quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. The guests, who had initially wanted to mock, stood up one after the other, unable to contain their admiration. Some clapped their hands enthusiastically, others leaned forward to whisper to their neighbor, "I've never heard anything so perfect." Amelia sat for a few more seconds, letting the room absorb the power of her performance. Then she stood slowly, a discreet but sure smile illuminating her face. She inclined her head slightly in gratitude. Every movement, every gesture, expressed the dignity and absolute mastery of her art. Richard Whitman, flushed with shame, chewed the insides of his cheeks. His eyes flashed toward Amelia, but deep down he knew he had lost. His entire plan to humiliate her had collapsed in an instant. Evelyn Carter, meanwhile, stood with her arms crossed, unable to utter a single word. Even her legendary critic had been silenced by the young pianist's sheer mastery. Guests approached Amelia, some with sincere compliments, others with requests to meet the prodigy. Her reputation, until then confined to a few select circles, was beginning to spread with lightning speed. The mocking laughter that had greeted her entrance had turned into respectful glances, murmurs of admiration, and unanimous recognition of her talent. Amid the ovation, Amelia felt a silent satisfaction. She hadn't just played the piano, she had transformed what should have been a humiliating moment into a resounding triumph. Every amazed smile, every sincere applause, every respectful look reinforced the silent lesson she had just taught: underestimating someone based on their appearance or background is a mistake that comes at a high price. For the first time that evening, she felt a profound calm wash over her. She had won more than musical success, she had won her dignity, her respect, and that of all those who had sought to humiliate her. And in the great hall of the Whitman mansion, that lesson would remain etched in everyone's memory for a long time. As the applause continued, Amelia stepped back and gently placed her hands on the empty keyboard. She didn't say a word. No comment would be necessary to remind the arrogant of their error. Her gaze, calm and assured, swept the room, stopping for a moment on Richard and Evelyn. Richard, flushed with frustration, looked away. He had wanted to belittle her, to make her seem like a mere attraction, and yet he found himself humiliated despite himself. His plan had failed, and every reaction from the guests confirmed it. The pride that had always driven him was shattered by Amelia's sheer control. Evelyn Carter, a formidable critic, felt her reputation wavering. She had wanted to judge, criticize, humiliate. But the power of Amelia's talent had neutralized her. Even she, with her experience and expertise, could not help but acknowledge the young pianist's superiority. The guests, for their part, were fascinated. Some whispered half-hearted compliments, others rushed to congratulate Amelia on her performance. The looks that had been mocking had transformed into admiration and respect. Every smile, every gesture of gratitude underscored the lesson Richard and Evelyn had just learned: arrogance in the face of genuine talent is always punished. Amelia, for her part, savored this subtle revenge. She hadn't needed words to earn her respect. Her music, her mastery, and her dignity had been enough. Each note, each calculated silence, had built a silent but resounding victory. For Richard and Evelyn, the moment was bittersweet. They had thought they could play with her, manipulate the situation, but the opposite had happened. They had become witnesses to their own mistake, humiliated without anyone needing to overwhelm them with words. Amelia finally turned back to the audience and, with a graceful gesture, invited them to cheer one last time. The applause redoubled, bursting forth as a reminder of her triumph. She had transformed the situation, taken control, and asserted her dignity with elegance. That night, everyone understood that true power lay not in wealth, arrogance, or judgment, but in talent, perseverance, and self-belief. And Amelia Johnson, a black pianist and genius prodigy, had just given a lesson no one would forget. The days following the Whitman Gala were filled with unexpected changes for Amelia Johnson. The performance, which was supposed to be a moment of humiliation, had transformed into a dazzling demonstration of her talent, and news of her triumph spread quickly through society and artistic circles. Invitations to prestigious concerts began to arrive, some from renowned conservatories, others from influential patrons eager to support such a rare talent. Opportunities poured in, but Amelia remained true to her artistic vision. She wanted her music to touch people, to inspire, and to remain a symbol of dignity and power. Richard Whitman, for his part, could not escape the bitterness of his defeat. His plan to humiliate Amelia had not only failed, but it had exposed his arrogance and poor judgment to all the guests present. His attempts to regain a position of influence after the gala were in vain. Every mention of Amelia in conversations or articles reminded him of his mistake. Evelyn Carter, known for her harsh criticism, also had to re-evaluate her perceptions. She had always believed that her judgment could define an artist's worth, but Amelia had shown her that true talent transcends prejudices and social expectations. Evelyn, humiliated in her attempt to control public opinion, began to treat Amelia with a respect she had never shown before. For Amelia, these days marked more than just artistic success. They represented a personal victory, confirmation that talent, patience, and self-belief always trump arrogance and condescension. Every admiring smile, every invitation to perform for a new audience, every word of recognition was proof that her art could change perceptions and inspire respect. She also understood that her performance had not only served as a personal triumph, but had left a lasting lesson for all those who had tried to belittle her. Arrogance and contempt, she believed, are always revealed when confronted with the truth of pure, genuine talent. So Amelia continued to play, each melody reinforcing her reputation and her conviction. Music is not only an art, it is a weapon against injustice and ignorance, a way to transform humiliation into glory and to remind everyone of the value of dignity and respect. Within weeks of the Whitman Gala, Amelia Johnson's career was taking off at a speed she could never have imagined. Invitations to perform at prestigious venues poured in, from conservatories to international festivals. Influential patrons wanted to support her, and renowned critics were claiming that her name would soon be heard around the world. Each performance was a celebration of her talent, but also a silent statement against those who had tried to diminish her. Amelia hadn't just won a victory on stage, she had transformed the expected humiliation into a resounding testament to her greatness. Her music, powerful and emotive, touched all generations, all backgrounds. Richard Whitman and Evelyn Carter, however, had never forgotten that evening. Their attempts at humiliation had made them look ridiculous in the eyes of the guests and had served as a catalyst for Amelia's fame. Every mention of her name reminded them of their past arrogance and their abject failure. Richard now avoided any event where Amelia might perform, while Evelyn, despite her reputation as a harsh critic, could only acknowledge her genius. Amelia, on the other hand, remained humble but firm in her approach. She knew that her success was not only due to her talent, but also to her perseverance, her confidence, and her ability to turn a challenge into a triumph. She used her art to inspire, to educate, and to remind the world that underestimating someone based on their appearance or background is a mistake that always comes at a high price. At her inaugural concert in New York City, before an enthusiastic and diverse audience, Amelia stood at her grand piano, ready to deliver an unforgettable performance. The lights dimmed slightly, and she let her fingers glide over the keys. Every note, every chord, every silence was imbued with her mastery and inner strength. At the end of the concert, the room erupted in a standing ovation, a roar of applause that seemed to last forever. Amelia bowed, her eyes shining, aware that every note played had marked a turning point in her life and in the lives of all those who had underestimated her. That evening, Amelia Johnson was no longer just a pianist, she was a symbol of talent, dignity, and triumph over arrogance. The lessons of the past remained etched in her memory, but she looked to the future with confidence and ambition, ready to conquer the world with her music and remind everyone, with every note, that true genius never allows itself to be humbled.